Our protocols were developed with MDs and nurses, leaders from our medical school, nursing school, and pharmacy school. We engage experts from public health, our campus health providers, and administrators. The University of Hawaii has had vaccination and testing requirements in place for students who choose to come to our campus for decades. This is one additional vaccination or test requirement, both of which have existed. And COVID-19 vaccination mandates have been upheld all the way to the Supreme Court, notably in the case of Indiana University. I know this is a difficult topic. I know people have varied opinions, but I am confident that we are following the best scientific and medical advice we can to try to keep our students and our employees safe during this extremely difficult time when we are now seeing our Hawaii hospitals overloaded and unable to care for others because of the deluge of COVID-19 cases. Last week, we ran an additional student survey. We got a 27% response rate, higher at our universities than at our community colleges. The number of students who responded that they are fully or partly vaccinated range from over 90% to under 70% at Kauai Community College. Almost half of those not vaccinated say that they will only be vaccinated upon full authorization. Now that's we don't know that it's an unbiased sample, but if that data is any indication, we can expect between 90 and 95% of our students who come to campus to be vaccinated. The employees survey we did much earlier, but based on that data, again, if we can, if we project from the sample of voluntary respondents, we would also have around 95% of our employees vaccinated. So our campuses are likely to be about as safe as anywhere one can go. The data that we have is survey data. We are shifting now to actual vaccination reporting. Some state agencies are using an attestation because, as I'm sure most of you are aware, the governor has mandated that all state employees be either vaccinated or tested, pretty much following along exactly what we have done here at the university before then. We are using our Lumicite application. That's what we've been using for health checks through the last semester, daily health checks. We now have a way for all of our students, faculty, and visitors to upload their vaccination status. That has been going on actively over the past, primarily over the past week or so. And we will also be using that to track testing data. And we believe that will be much more accurate since we'll have actual results. Kudos to Vice President Yoshimi, Information Technology Services, and the whole team working on Banner, STAR, Lumicite, even PeopleSoft to help us organize this data and be able to provide effective reporting to everybody who needs it. We have also been working with our unions. The governor's approach is that each agency is left to work with the unions to implement the vaccine mandate. The general perspective on this is that it is legal to mandate vaccination requirements for employees without negotiation, but what does require negotiation is working through the specific details of how that takes place. And that's what we're doing now. HGA and UPW have identified UPA, our faculty union, as the lead, but we're working directly with all three as a group. So when we finish, we will have one agreement for all of our employees, regardless of collective bargaining unit. And of course, our excluded employees will follow the same protocols, pretty straightforward. And I want to thank Vice President Erica LaCroix has been a lead on working with UPA and the other unions on that with the support of OGC and Vice President Govea and her team in HR as well. We have updated our guidelines and FAQs. I think it's pretty straightforward. Everyone is required to be vaccinated. We are not disenrolling students from in-person classes. However, they will be required to participate in weekly testing. Again, we test for other things. In particular, you cannot enroll on a campus without a TB test. You can't actually, well, I'll stop there. We are also updating our religious exemption forms. We are also updating our masking protocols. You can see I'm actually wearing my mask today in the room. When things were looking better, we were removing them in front of microphones, and we're tightening up on all of us. There are just some amazing people who are accomplishing the impossible. I will just say I've mentioned a few already. Associate Vice President Hei Okimoto works with the student affairs officers of all the campuses and the academic officers to make sure our student and course-related information systems will serve and that the protocols will work. I have to acknowledge once again Dr. Lee Boykinseo Lam, the Associate Dean at JABSOM, who I honestly don't know how she does her day job. She helps us with everything and with all of our external relations as well. All of the chief administrative officers on all of the campuses have engaged in making sure we're ready. Our health and well-being group includes Associate Dean Chris Qureshi from nursing, Dean Carolyn Ma from pharmacy at UH Hilo, Dr. Al Katz from public health, Jairus Hedges, our dean of the medical school, co-chairs that group, and many more. Vice President Okinaga took a couple well-deserved weeks off, but was still reading everything we were doing to make sure that we comport with legalities as we move ahead. We had vaccination pop-ups at all three of our universities planned for last week and this week. Manoa went first, and it was particularly useful for our international students, many of whom were unable to get vaccinated where they were, and they have started arriving in town, so we're glad to provide them that opportunity. Vice President Govea and her team have worked and are now finalizing a testing contract that will serve all the islands. And that data, as I mentioned, Vice President Yoshimi is working to integrate the test results directly into Lumicite so that you'll be able to hold up your phone and be able to show that you were vaccinated, whether you were tested, and whether you've done your daily health check to check for symptoms. It's a pretty remarkable piece of work considering that we had nothing like this in place before this pandemic hit. All that said, as is the case throughout the state, our case counts are increasing, much worse than we have seen before, and this is before classes started. As the DOE has reported, large numbers of case counts reflect what's going on in the community. It does not mean it's unsafe to come to campus. It simply means there is widespread community transmission, and Hawaii as a state is not in a good place. And Hawaii Island in particular is looking the worst and is most likely to have additional measures imposed, as you may have read in this morning's papers. In athletics, we have a 100% vaccination requirement to be able to travel. Our student athletes are being vaccinated along with our coaching staff and others on the staff. We are working with the counties of Honolulu and Hawaii on whether and how we will be permitted to have fans at our games. I will tell you these are lively and spirited discussions, and we're working closely. This week I was on a call with the mayor, the governor, and the director of health. So this is, there's a lot of interest, and we know people in the community both want to be able to attend UH athletic events, and it's a sign to many that there is some semblance of normalcy even during this pandemic. Our position going in is 100% vaccination for any spectator who comes to any athletic event. But there are many, many more details than that to work through. So with that, let me shift to a discussion of enrollment. So today is 4 days before the first day of instruction, which is Monday. I've given you some mixed reports up to now, and I will just say that we have to give all kinds of caveats because our official census date is the 5th Friday of the term. So we're still 6 weeks away from that. But the numbers are looking really good, and we always want them to look good at this point rather than bad. As a system, our headcount enrollment is currently up 3% compared to 4 days before first day of instruction last fall. If this holds, it will be the first increase in UH system enrollment since 2011. UH Manoa is leading the way right now with a whopping 8.5% increase. That's 1,400 additional students at UH Manoa. If it holds, it would be the third year of increases out of the last 4 years. So UH Manoa has really been early in turning this around since we've engaged intensely around enrollment management. UH Hilo is up as of this morning, 3.1%. If it holds, this will be their first increase since 2012. Community colleges are flat. It's actually up 3 students as of this morning. If there is any increase at all, this would be the first increase in enrollment at the community colleges since 2010. Regent Westerman Kauai Community College, which had been lagging, is now catching up as they have been entering their early college numbers. So it no longer has the largest decrease so far. Our UH residence halls at Manoa are full, and there is a wait list, and that's with 100% vaccination requirement and full capacity. This bodes well for our 2 pending student housing projects that we've updated you on repeatedly. Vice President Young has been working on those, both the NOAA project and the Atherton project. The UH Hilo dorms have 3 at full capacity and 1 at 50% capacity, also a great increase over last year. So we're definitely not following the national trends, which show continuing decline in enrollment, particularly at community colleges. We are not following the last recession either. Last time around, the community colleges led a huge enrollment boom that took us from what has really been a pretty steady state of around 50,000 headcount students in the UH system. We went over 60,000 with the boom from the last recession, and we are now looking at returning to 50,000 probably this year or next as things go, which is our kind of decades-long trend. We will, of course, provide a much more complete report to the board in November. That's after census, and we break down the data based on different categories. But what I will say is at this point for Manoa, the increases are across all categories. More residents, more WUI and domestic students, and more international students. Let me update now on the Clarence T.C. Ching field improvements. That work is just about wrapped up. Our first home game is the first week of September, Labor Day weekend. We are really looking forward to it. We have hosted both the House Finance Committee and the House Higher Education Committee asked to visit, and we had them here this week. They've been extraordinarily impressed with the quality of work and our ability to execute. We are inviting the Senate now. They've been informally invited, but we'll reach out a little more formally. All of the suites are now sold to sponsors, which is wonderful news for us. And I just can't say enough. This was an incredible hairball dropped in our lap You will recall at the end of December, we were told, or the middle of December, we were told we would not be able to play with fans at Aloha Stadium. We spent some time assessing a variety of options, including playing on neighbor islands, playing all away games. We settled on the Ching Field approach, and this remarkable work has been done in just 6 months or so by Vice President Gouveia and her team, Athletics Director Matlin and his team. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this in state government in my time here. We did have a set of legislative briefings last week, and this project came up. The first briefing was last Monday, and that was with the Senate Higher Education Committee and the Ways and Means Committee. The agenda called for discussion of the procurement of the Ching Field project, the Atherton Y project, the Cancer Center early phase clinical trials program, and the committees also announced that they would evaluate the policies and procedures regarding outside employment for personnel employed at UH and at RCUH. Much of the discussion was around the Ching Field project, particularly the procurement. What we had done is when we decided that was our best path forward, we were fortunate that we already had competitively bid contracts in place to do work that was planned before we knew we would be playing football there. As a result of the untimely notice, we worked through the options and determined that our best path forward would be to extend existing competitively bid contracts to cover the additional work needed. That was a complicated internal discussion, and I stand by that recommendation by Vice President Gouveia. From our perspective, we had a very difficult problem to solve. Others can take another perspective and may or may not have been as concerned as we were about being able to play football this season. We also did not believe it would be effective to have multiple prime contractors working independently in a constrained site with this highly compressed time frame. It just didn't seem realistic to us. There was also discussion at the hearing around the tragic fatal accident involving an employee of a subcontractor to a subcontractor of our prime contractor. Questions of liability were raised. There was also substantial discussion of the licensing requirements for contractors. Vice President Gouveia assured the committee that the university had fulfilled our obligations regarding licenses held by contractors and subcontractors, as well as that the liability did not lie with UH for that tragic accident. Legislators pointed out that we could be sued. And indeed, I think as all of you know, and we have a number of attorneys on the board, anybody can be sued at any time in the United States. So indeed, that is a correct statement that we can be sued. But it was not a particularly helpful conversation from our perspective. Then they shifted to a discussion of RCUH, and it began with the question of RCUH conferring degrees. We clarified for them that while RCUH does administer or provides administrative support for some of our executive master's programs, notably those in Scheidler, RCUH has nothing to do with the conferral of degrees. They're purely providing administrative support. These programs go back certainly 30 years or more. They were originally created and run through the University of Hawaii Foundation. In 1995, then UH President Kenneth Mortimer directed that they be moved from the UH Foundation, which has a philanthropic role, as you know, to RCUH, which has an administrative support role. And that practice has continued since 1995. It turns out the Manoa campus leadership had identified this approach as being worthy of a review. We shared our judgment. This is Provost Bruno, Chief Business Officer Sandy French, and I. We notified Scheidler that this was a concern we had. That concern was publicly noticed. It was fully transparent. And at that point, it apparently came to the attention of some in the legislature. We're already planning to look at whether or not it makes sense. The most recent Board of Regents action on this longstanding practice were the approvals in March 2019 of 3 new executive MS degrees in information systems, marketing management, and finance. These are executive master's programs in Scheidler. And Dean Rowley has explained that executive master's programs to a college of business are part of the business model. Business doesn't tend to generate external funding through sponsored research. It's just not very common, but executive master's programs are a big part of how they do business, finance research support for faculty and others. And this is standard practice. During the committee review of these, we verbally, Dean Rowley noted the use of RCUH for these programs. There was some confusion expressed during the hearing about the agreement between UH and RCUH, and there is a separate agreement under which RCUH works with other state agencies. We tried to clarify that as distinct. About 90% of the work that RCUH does is for UH, but they have a separate agreement if they work with other state agencies, which comprises close to 10% of that work as well. Legislators also asked questions about dual employment and outside employment policies. Vice President Sirmos clarified how that takes place. Outside employment does require a disclosure process. It is managed by the deans. It is work over and above their standard workload, so it is more similar to overload in how we look at it. And as the materials noted and as approved by the Board of Regents, Scheidler faculty teaching in executive programs do so above and beyond their standard workload. There were also questions raised about RCUH positions advertised to serve UH projects. It was noted that unlike UH positions, RCUH employees do not participate in the state's retirement system. As a result, the fringe benefit costs are as much as 30% lower than UH fringe benefit costs, which follow the state of Hawaii. RCUH positions can be tied to the length of a particular contract or grant, and RCUH employees do not attain any kind of employment security for after the project is completed. And that's part of the review process that takes place before UH hires a position through RCUH with extramural funding. We then turn to the Cancer Center Early Phase Clinical Research Center. Much of the discussion was about the construction contract. This was a complicated project. It was split funded. The federal government through NIH appropriated or awarded us competitively $6.5 million to start the project. The next year, the legislature, and this was really championed by the late Senator Breen Harimoto, who subsequently passed away from cancer. He championed a $6.5 million matching state CIP appropriation. So our situation at that point was that we had already received the federal funds. As we do with most federal expenditures, including construction, that work was service ordered to RCUH under our controlled environment requiring specific MOUs and assignment of responsibilities. When the state funding was appropriated, again, we reviewed all of our options, and I agreed with the recommendation from Vice President Govea that we should service order the state funds to RCUH. This is something we have not done recently. You got an update from Vice President Sirmos in the R&I committee on the specific projects when we've done that. None in the very recent past at all. But we did request the board's approval to service order the second $6.5 million from the state so that we could have one construction project instead of two, again, for all of the same reasons with Ching Field. We need to achieve the federal deadlines, and we also didn't want to have two separate contractors working on the same project in the same location while we were trying to meet the deadlines of the federal government. We brought that to the Board of Regents last September. There was a robust discussion, and thank you. We appreciate the board's support of our recommendation, and the project is now actively underway. If that was a lengthy explanation of the hearing or information briefing, I will tell you the briefing was longer, and we did not finish the agenda. The legislators stated that they still had questions relating to RCUH, and we hadn't gotten to the Atherton agenda item at all. So we have been advised that there will be a follow-up informational briefing next Wednesday to try to complete those items. The second information briefing we had that week was Wednesday. That was with the Senate Special Committee on Hawaiʻi Procurement. The agenda called for a brief description of our procedures, our bid protest procedures, average time for resolving them, our training and certification held by UH procurement officers, challenges we face, and suggested recommendations. The membership of this committee was largely overlapping with the attendees at the Monday briefing, with whom we had just spent a couple of hours. And it turned out that much of the Sunday session the Wednesday session was spent drilling into aspects of specific construction projects about which individual senators had concerns. Of particular note were their concerns about change orders. After a follow-up meeting with individual legislators, Vice President Gouveia has decided to cancel one change order that concerns were expressed about that had not been executed. This was a change order to demolish the PBS building after the last occupants had moved out. Originally, we had thought the building might be usable for revenue generation, but after the occupants moved out, and that was the original base contract, Vice President Young and his team with Michael Shibata realized that the building was essentially valueless and would need to be demolished so we could monetize the property. So rather than have our same contractor do that demolition, we will do another competitive procurement that will extend the time frame until it will likely increase the cost, and it will extend the time frame before which we can begin to monetize the property. Vice President Gouveia, because most of the time was spent on specific projects rather than the agenda, Vice President Gouveia arranged a separate meeting with the senators who wanted to focus on the issues around how the state can improve its procurement processes as well, since we didn't really get to that in any significant way in the hearing. Let me close then with just a couple of other notations. One is our community colleges. We were recognized as the best community college system in the nation, according to Wallet Hub. They rank a number of different entities. We're up to #1 this year. We were #4 last year, which was not too shabby. But they looked at community college systems throughout the country based on cost, financing, educational outcomes, and career outcomes. We're very proud of this one. And individually, Kauai Community College, small but mighty, came in #7 nationally. Kapi'olani Community College was #11, and Honolulu Community College was #30. This is out of all community colleges in the country. Kudos to Erica, Mike Unabasami, Tammy Chun and the entire team, our chancellors at all of the campuses, for some amazing work. One example I'll note was our announcement this week of our second Oahu Back to Work project. These are people that we train for the workforce who are not included in our headcount credit enrollees, but that's an essential part of what we do. We partnered with the City and County of Honolulu with their COVID relief funds to provide free classes, loaner laptops, and hotspots. We ran a program last year and found that about 22% of our trainees had found a job afterward, and 55% were applying for a job, which is a great start to it. Our goal this round is to train another 500 Oahu residents with short-term training for jobs that are available now. We're targeting business and technology, healthcare, human services, and the skilled trades. Lastly, let me mention a really nice achievement at Manoa. On Tuesday, we held a ceremony to commission our very first Naval ROTC class in our history. This is something that people have been trying to do for, I think, decades. It got on my radar in my first year as president with Admiral Harry Harris. But with a lot of heavy lifting from our congressional delegation, all of them, a lot of support from multiple leaders from PACOM, Indo-PACOM, and PAC Fleet over the last, I guess 6 years now. We finally got notification last year from the Secretary of Navy that we could start a program. They put a team on site to work with us, and our first 23 midshipmen will be starting this fall with us. We will add probably about the same size each year, so we should be over 100 by the time the first class graduates. These are full scholarship students. About half are from Hawaii and about half are from other parts of the country, and we're very excited to welcome them to our campus as well. I'll mention that we had Senator Schatz, we had Congressman Case, and Admiral Sam Paparo, PAC Fleet Commander, administered their oath of office to the midshipmen who were present on campus as well. So we look forward to many years of success ahead as they join our Army and Air Force ROTC programs on campus. So with that, thank you, Chair Moore, who I should say made the request that there be a little bit of an agenda for the President's report, so there would be some idea what was coming up in case there were questions.
Thank you, President Lassner. Regents, questions, discussions, comments on the President's report? And actually, one of the reasons for listing the items, COVID-19 update, enrollment update, Clarence T.C. Ching Field improvements, and the legislative briefings is that by listing them, we're then allowed to discuss them. Otherwise, they're not on the agenda as specific items, and we properly should not talk about them. So those items, those 4 items, are open for discussion. Hearing none?
Chair, I will ask the question then.
Thank you, Regent.
So the regents were transmitted 3 letters from the Senate. I guess they pertain to RCUH and procurement and maybe the Ching complex, I don't recall. Is the administration going to respond to the issues raised in that letter, or does it recommend another course?
No, absolutely. So the 3 letters were sent separately to RCUH, to me representing the UH administration, and to the Board of Regents. So our intent is that the senators who wrote those letters will receive 3 replies. There was some overlap between the issues raised. but the questions, the wording was not identical in all cases. Obviously, the administration and the board office working with board leadership work extremely closely together. And we also work closely with RCUH. So there will be no surprises, and we can share all three responses with the full board. And the responses are requested before the follow-up hearing. So if the senators are not satisfied with the written responses, I'm confident that they will ask us more questions.
Thank you.
Let me ask you another one about women's volleyball, which I think is scheduled to start in 2 weeks. Any discussion about fan attendance for those games?
Yes. No conclusion just yet, but this was a topic of conversation in the meeting I mentioned with the governor, the director of health, and the mayor. I think the question is whether, how many, with what mitigation, concessions, etc.
Okay. Any feeling about which way we're gonna go?
I don't want to prejudge. We are requesting that we be able to have fans there with a 100% vaccination requirement, with reduced capacity, and with a number of mitigation measures around entrance and exit, so that people are not, facing each other, with no mingling. That was a concern of the director of health. But we do not yet have full clearance from authorities on any of that.